Ed King surrendered, left all of us here. We're stuck.
Good afternoon. I am here to discuss about the Bataan Dead March. So let's start. Let's study history.
The day after Japan bombed the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Japanese invasion of the Philippines began. Within a month, the Japanese had captured Manila, the capital of the Philippines, and the American and Filipino defenders of Luzon were forced to retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. For the next 3 months, the combined U.S.-Filipino army held out despite the lack of naval and air support. And on April 9, the United States Army in the Far East, also known as USOFE, crippled by starvation and disease. A U.S. general named Edward King Jr. surrendered his approximately 76,000 troops composed of 66,000 Filipinos and 10,000 Americans to a force not more than 54,000 Japanese troops at Bataan. The Filipinos and Americans that surrendered soon were rounded up by the Japanese and forced to march approximately 65 miles or 104 kilometers from Mariveles on the southern end of the Bataan Peninsula to San Fernando. Then they were taken by rail in camp and unsanitary boxcars farther north to Capas. From there, they walked an additional of 7 miles or approximately 11 kilometers to Camp O'Donnell. Camp O'Donnell is a former Philippine Army Training Center used by the Japanese military to intern Filipino and American prisoners. The men were divided into groups of approximately 100 soldiers per group, and what became known as the Bataan Death March typically took each group around 5 days to complete. The exact figures are unknown, but it is believed that thousands of troops died because of the brutality of their captors, who were starved and beat the marchers, shot and bayoneted those who are too weak to walk. One of the reasons for the cruelty of the Japanese is cultural. To a Japanese soldier, surrender is never part of their vocabulary. A soldier is expected to fight to the death, and a soldier who surrenders is worse than a vile animal. Along the route of the main march, perhaps as many as 500 Americans and perhaps 2,500 Filipinos were killed. Of the 76,000 prisoners, only 56,000 arrived at the Philippine Army camp at Camp O'Donnell. An estimated 12,000 men perished during the march while a few thousand managed to escape. Also in Camp O'Donnell, perhaps some 26,000 Filipino soldiers and some 1,500 Americans died of starvation and disease. In all, of the some 22,000 Americans, soldiers, sailors, airmen, including Marines, captured by Japanese forces on the Bataan Peninsula, only about 50,000 returned to the United States, a death rate of some 40%. It was not until January 27, 1944 that the U.S. government informed the American public about the march. When it was released, sworn statements of military officers who had escaped. Shortly thereafter, the stories of these officers were featured in a Life magazine article. The Bataan Death March and other Japanese actions were used to arouse fury in the United States. In an attempt to counter the American propaganda value of the march, the Japanese had the Manila Times report that the prisoners were treated humanely and their death rate had to be attributed to the intransigence of the American commanders who did not surrender until the men were on the verge of death. After the end of World War II, the Japanese commander of the invasion forces in the Philippines, Lieutenant General Homa Masaharu, was charged with responsibility for the march and widespread abuses at Camp O'Donnell. He was tried and convicted by a U.S. military commission in Manila in January to February 1946 and was executed by a firing squad on April 3, 1946. So in the years that followed, the men who fought in the Philippines formed a veterans organization, the American Defenders of Bataan and Corregidor, to press for reparations from Japan and better treatment by the American government of the veterans of these campaigns. In the 1980s, the U.S. officially recognized the suffering and sacrifice of these veterans, awarding them the Bronze Star and eventually classifying them as 100% disabled for government pensions.
And now may I present to you some of the notable survivors of the Death March.
First one is Jose Agdamag. He was a Filipino sharpshooter, competed at the 1960 and 1968 Summer Olympics. Another one is Ramon Bagatsing. He is the only Indian Filipino and person with disability and was the longest serving mayor of Manila. Another one is Edward P. King, was a Major General in the US who gained prominence for leading the defense of the Bataan Peninsula. And another one is our former President Ferdinand Marcos. He was a Philippine lawyer and a politician. He was also the head of state from 1966 to 1986.